The ballroom shimmered under the soft golden lights. Every corner of the grand hotel was filled with laughter, clinking glasses and the faint hum of an orchestra playing in the background. It was one of those evenings where the wealthy gathered to celebrate themselves, where even the air seemed expensive. Waiters in crisp uniforms moved like shadows, quietly replacing glasses, refilling plates, and making sure every guest had what they wanted before they even asked. Among them was a young waitress with tired eyes but a calm face. She moved carefully between tables, balancing a tray that felt heavier with each passing minute. Her steps were light, her voice polite, and her presence almost invisible, just another worker in a sea of luxury. But there was something different about her. Every time she passed the stage, her eyes lingered for a brief moment on the grand piano sitting quietly near the orchestra. It was polished so perfectly that it reflected the chandelier above like a mirror. To most, it was just part of the decor. To her, it was something else, something that stirred memories she had tried to bury. She kept her thoughts to herself, focusing on her work. The guests didn't notice her, not really. They saw the tray, the uniform, the service, not the person. But she didn't mind. She was used to it. Working at events like these paid the bills, helped her support her family, and kept her busy enough not to think too much about what she had lost. As she served a group of laughing businessmen, the orchestra stopped for a short break. A man stood up from the main table at the front, a man everyone recognized immediately. He was the host of the evening, a billionaire known for his sharp business mind, expensive taste, and unpredictable sense of humor. He loved being the center of attention, and the crowd adored him for it. He had donated a fortune to charity that night, earning cheers and applause from everyone. The young waitress lowered her head when she passed by his table, hoping not to draw attention. But fate had other plans. The billionaire's eyes followed her as she moved through the crowd. Something about her quietness caught his curiosity. He noticed how her gaze brushed across the piano again and again, like a secret she was trying not to reveal. With a half smile, he leaned back in his chair, tapping his glass lightly with a spoon until the room quieted down. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said loudly, his voice full of playful arrogance, "it seems our talented orchestra needs a short break. But perhaps," he paused, glancing directly at the waitress, "someone among us might be willing to entertain us in the meantime." The guests chuckled, unsure of what he meant. The waitress froze, not realizing at first that he was talking about her. When she finally looked up, his eyes were still fixed on her. "You there," he said, pointing casually. "You keep looking at that piano like it's calling your name. Tell me, do you play?" Her face turned pale. The room suddenly felt smaller, the air heavier. Every pair of eyes turned toward her. She opened her mouth to answer, but no words came out. I just like music, sir," she said softly. The billionaire grinned. "Oh, just like music, do you? Then maybe you'd like to give us a tune. Come on, don't be shy. We could use something fresh." A few guests laughed, assuming he was joking. But he wasn't. He was serious and enjoying every second of her discomfort. "Please, sir, I can't," she said quickly, her voice trembling. "I'm just serving tonight." "Nonsense," he replied. "Music doesn't care who you are. If you can play, then play. What's the harm? It's all in good fun." The laughter grew louder around her. Some whispered that she might embarrass herself. Others smirked, eager to see what would happen. She could feel her hands shaking, the tray wobbling slightly as she tried to steady her breath. The manager, standing nearby, gave her a small nod as if to say, "Just do it and get it over with." She swallowed hard. There was no easy way out. Refusing would make it worse. So she placed her tray down on a nearby table, wiped her hands nervously on her apron, and began walking slowly toward the piano. Every step echoed in her mind. She could feel hundreds of eyes following her. The billionaire leaned forward with an amused grin, certain this would be a quick and forgettable moment. A little entertainment before dessert. When she reached the piano, she paused for a long moment. Her reflection stared back at her from its polished surface, tired, uncertain, and small against the grandness of the room. Her heart raced so fast she thought it might drown out her thoughts. She sat down gently, fingers hovering above the keys but not touching them. The crowd waited, some giggling quietly, others whispering. The billionaire crossed his arms, clearly entertained. She closed her eyes for a second, trying to remember what it felt like to play, not for others but for herself. It had been years. Years since her father's old upright piano sat in their living room. Years since she'd stopped practicing, since life had forced her to trade music for survival. She remembered the sound of her father's voice, the way he used to hum along while she played, telling her that every note carried a piece of her soul. She had promised him once that she'd never stop playing, but promises don't always survive hardship. The guests began to grow restless, the silence stretching too long. Someone coughed. Someone else whispered, "Maybe she doesn't actually know how." And then, as if something inside her finally broke free, her fingers pressed the first key. The soft note floated through the room like a whisper. Then another. Then another. The melody was fragile, hesitant, almost trembling at first, but there was something in it. Something that made the room fall quiet again. The guests who had been whispering leaned forward, curious. The billionaire's smirk slowly faded as the tune began to take shape. Her hands started to move faster, more confidently. The sound filled the space, gentle, emotional, and strangely familiar. She wasn't playing for them anymore. She was playing for the memory of what she had lost, for the girl she used to be, for the music she once loved. In those moments, she forgot the crowd, the laughter, the humiliation. All that existed was the piano and the flood of emotions she had kept locked away for years. But just as suddenly as it began, she stopped. Her fingers froze in midair. She hadn't meant to go that far. She wasn't supposed to show this part of herself. Her chest rose and fell as she took a deep breath, realizing the entire room had gone completely silent. The billionaire sat still, eyes fixed on her, expression unreadable. She stood up quietly, stepping back from the piano, ready to return to her work as if nothing had happened. She whispered an apology and turned away. But the moment wasn't lost on anyone. There was something in that brief melody, something real, that had touched the room in a way words never could. As she disappeared back into the crowd, carrying her tray again, a strange stillness remained. The laughter didn't come back right away. People looked around, unsure of what to say. And for the first time that night, the billionaire didn't speak either. He just watched her, the faint echo of her unfinished song still hanging in the air. No one realized it yet, but that short, fragile tune was only the beginning of something far greater, something that would soon change both of their lives in ways neither could have imagined. The next few minutes, after her short piano tune, felt strangely heavy. The room was no longer filled with the same loud laughter or clinking of glasses as before. People spoke quietly, as if they didn't want to disturb the echo of what they'd just heard. The billionaire, who had started the moment as a joke, now sat in silence, swirling the drink in his glass without taking a sip. Something in that brief melody had unsettled him. The young waitress, meanwhile, had returned to her duties, pretending nothing had happened. Her hands still trembled a little as she carried plates, but her expression was calm again, her eyes lowered just as before. Inside, though, her heart was pounding. She kept replaying the moment over and over. The sound of the keys, the way her fingers remembered what her mind had forgotten. It had felt alive, almost painful. She hadn't expected the music to come out that way. It had been buried deep for so long. She tried to stay invisible, hoping the attention would fade. But it didn't. Every few minutes she caught someone looking at her, a guest whispering to another, a musician from the orchestra glancing curiously. It made her uneasy. She didn't want sympathy or praise. She only wanted to finish her shift and go home. But the billionaire wasn't done with her. After the orchestra returned to play again, the evening slowly regained its rhythm. People danced, toasted, and carried on as if nothing unusual had happened. Yet the billionaire kept glancing toward the back of the room where she worked. His expression was unreadable, a mix of curiosity and something else, something like guilt. He didn't like being challenged, especially not by someone who wasn't supposed to stand out. Later that night, as the gala neared its end, he stood again and made his way toward the bar area where some of the servers were cleaning up. The moment she saw him approaching, the waitress froze. She didn't know whether to move away or stay. He stopped near her, resting his glass on the counter. "You never said you could play like that," he said in a calm tone. She hesitated before answering. "I don't really. It was a long time ago." He raised an eyebrow. "A long time ago? You're too young to be talking like that." She gave a small, polite smile. "I used to learn when I was younger, but things changed. Life doesn't always go how we plan." He studied her for a moment, clearly curious. You're wasting that kind of talent serving drinks. She looked down at her tray. It pays the rent, she said softly. The billionaire leaned slightly closer, lowering his voice. Do you know how many people in that room were speechless when you played? I haven't seen that kind of reaction in years. You've got something rare and you shouldn't hide it. She didn't know what to say. Compliments from men like him usually came with strings attached. So, she simply nodded and stepped back to collect another empty glass. But he didn't walk away. Tell me something, he said. Why'd you stop playing? The question caught her off guard. Her hand paused midair. For a second, she didn't answer. Then quietly she said, My father passed away. After that, things became difficult. I had to work. There wasn't time for music anymore. The billionaire didn't respond right away. His confident expression softened slightly. I'm sorry, he said after a moment. I didn't mean to dig into something painful. It's all right, she replied, forcing a small smile. It's been years now. He nodded slowly, then straightened his jacket. Still, he said, trying to recover his usual tone, you shouldn't let the world forget what you can do. Not many people can make a room full of millionaires shut up. That made her chuckle quietly, though she didn't look up. I didn't mean to, she said. I just wanted the moment to end. He smiled, half amused, half impressed. Well, that's the first time anyone has silenced me without saying a word. And with that, he left, leaving her standing there, confused and oddly shaken. When the event finally ended and the last guests left, she helped clean up the tables. Her feet ached, her back hurt, but her mind was far away. The sound of the piano still lingered in her thoughts. She hadn't touched one in years. Not since the day her father's old instrument had been sold to pay off debts. Back then, she had promised herself she'd buy it back one day. But one day had stretched into years of working double shifts, paying bills and surviving. Dreams didn't fit into that schedule. As she clocked out and stepped into the quiet night, the city lights shimmered like reflections of her own thoughts, bright, distant, unreachable. She pulled her worn jacket tighter around her and started walking to the bus stop. The sound of laughter from the hotel faded behind her, replaced by the hum of passing cars and the cool whisper of the wind. The billionaire, meanwhile, sat alone in his car outside for a moment before his driver started the engine. He wasn't sure why he was still thinking about her. He'd met hundreds of talented people, singers, pianists, artists. But there had been something raw in the way she played. It wasn't polished or perfect, but it had soul. It had truth. And that truth had made him feel something he hadn't felt in years: humility. The next morning, the waitress woke early, just as she always did. Her small apartment was quiet except for the sound of a kettle boiling. She made tea, looked out the window, and tried to shake off the night before. But as she stood there, her fingers unconsciously moved across the table, mimicking the motion of piano keys. She smiled faintly, then quickly pulled her hands away. She went about her day, working another shift at a nearby cafe. Her co-workers had heard about the gala, and one of them joked, I heard you played for the big boss last night. Did he give you a raise or what? She laughed it off. Nothing like that. He just made me play to amuse himself. Still, her co-worker said, grinning, You're brave. I would have fainted in front of all those people. Brave, she didn't feel brave. She had felt terrified. But maybe, just maybe, something good had come out of it. That evening, while she was cleaning up, the cafe manager came over, holding a white envelope. Someone dropped this off for you earlier, he said. Didn't leave a name. Just said it's for the pianist from last night. Her hands hesitated before taking it. Inside was a folded piece of paper and a single card. A business card with the billionaire's company logo embossed in gold. On the paper, there were just a few words written neatly. Come see me. There's something I want to discuss. She stared at it for a long time, unsure whether to laugh or worry. Why would someone like him want to see her? Was this another joke? Or was he serious? That night she couldn't sleep. Every possibility played through her mind. Maybe he wanted her to perform at another event. Maybe he wanted to sponsor a concert. Or maybe he simply wanted to offer her a better job. Still, she wasn't naive. The world wasn't kind to people in her position. The next day, after much hesitation, she decided to go. The address on the card led to a tall glass building in the city center, where security guards checked her ID and guided her to a private elevator. Her hands felt cold as she rode up, watching the floors blink by. When the doors opened, she found herself in a large office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. The billionaire stood by the window speaking on the phone. He turned when he saw her and gestured for her to sit. "Glad you came," he said after hanging up. "I wasn't sure you would." "I wasn't sure either," she admitted quietly. He smiled. "I've been thinking about your performance. That kind of talent shouldn't be wasted. I know what it's like to lose something you care about because life gets in the way." She looked at him curiously. "What do you mean?" He shrugged lightly. "Let's just say success doesn't fill every space. Sometimes you trade too much to get it." There was a brief silence between them. Then he said, "I want to help you get back to music. If you're willing, I'll arrange lessons, find you a piano, even get you a small place to practice. Think of it as an investment, not in business, but in art." Her eyes widened in disbelief. "You don't even know me," she said softly. "I know enough," he replied. "I know sincerity when I see it. And I know that when you played that night, you meant every note. That's rare." She didn't know how to respond. Part of her wanted to say yes immediately, but another part hesitated. She had learned not to trust offers that sounded too good to be true. "Why me?" she finally asked. He smiled faintly. "Because you reminded me of something I lost a long time ago. Honesty." She sat there in silence, trying to process everything. For years, life had felt like a tunnel with no light at the end, and now out of nowhere, someone was offering her a way out. After a long pause, she said, "If this is real, then yes, I'll try." The billionaire extended his hand. "Good. Then let's start." As she left his office that day, her steps felt lighter than they had in years. She didn't know where this path would lead, but for the first time in a long while, hope didn't feel like a foolish thing to believe in. Outside, the city was glowing under the afternoon sun. She looked up at the sky, smiled softly, and whispered to herself, "Maybe music isn't done with me yet." And somewhere high above, in that glass tower, the billionaire watched her leave with a faint, thoughtful smile, unaware that this small act of kindness would change both their lives in ways neither could predict. The following weeks felt like a dream she didn't quite believe was real. After meeting the billionaire in his office, everything began to change little by little. True to his word, he arranged for her to have access to a small practice studio downtown. It wasn't luxurious, but it was private, quiet, and warm. The first time she stepped inside, she just stood there, staring at the piano in the middle of the room. It wasn't the same one from her childhood, but the moment she ran her fingers gently across the keys, something inside her woke up again. At first, it felt strange, like trying to remember a language she once knew. Her hands stumbled, her rhythm was off, and her confidence was fragile, but she didn't stop. Every day after her shifts, she went to that studio. Sometimes she stayed until midnight, playing old pieces she still remembered from years ago. Other times, she just sat in silence, listening to the faint echoes of her mistakes and starting again. The billionaire checked in occasionally, usually through short calls. He never pressured her or demanded anything. He only asked one thing, that she play honestly, not to impress anyone, not to chase perfection, but to express something true. It was the first time in years someone had told her that her feelings mattered. A few weeks later, he sent a music teacher to help her. The teacher was an older woman who had worked with many performers in the past. She was kind but strict. She made the waitress focus on details, posture, breathing, emotional balance. "Don't just hit the notes," the teacher often said. "Tell a story with your hands." It was difficult at first. Working double shifts and then practicing for hours left her exhausted. Some nights she wanted to quit, wondering if this opportunity was really meant for someone like her, but every time she thought about giving up, she remembered the night at the gala, the quiet room, the way her music had filled the silence, the feeling of being seen again for just a moment. That memory kept her going. The billionaire didn't say it, but he had been quietly arranging something bigger. He had friends in the art world, people who owned music halls and organized charity concerts. He thought her story, a waitress rediscovering her gift, deserved a real audience. But he also knew she wasn't ready yet. She needed time, space, and courage, so he waited. One evening, she arrived at the studio to find a small box on the piano bench. Inside was a simple note that said, "For your journey." Beneath it was a brand new music notebook and a small golden pin shaped like a treble clef. She smiled softly, realizing it must have been from him, She wore the pin every time she practiced after that. It reminded her that someone believed in her when she didn't believe in herself. Weeks turned into months. Slowly, her fingers regained their strength, her confidence grew, and her sound became richer. The teacher began smiling more during lessons. "Now you're not playing to remember," she said one day. "You're playing to feel." Still, part of her heart carried fear. Fear that this could all vanish as quickly as it came. She didn't fully understand why the billionaire cared or what he expected in return. But she couldn't deny that this second chance had given her life a new rhythm. Then one morning she received a call that made her hands tremble. The billionaire's assistant told her that there was going to be another charity gala, the same kind of event where everything had begun months ago. This time the billionaire wanted her to perform on stage. For a moment she couldn't breathe. "Perform?" she repeated. "Yes," the assistant said kindly. "He said it's time people hear what you've been working on. It will be your choice what to play." After the call ended, she sat in silence for a long time. Excitement, fear, and disbelief all mixed inside her. The thought of standing in front of that kind of audience again, the same crowd that once laughed when she was forced to play, made her stomach twist. But deep down she knew this was her chance to reclaim that moment. She practiced harder than ever. Day after day she played until her fingers ached. She didn't want revenge or attention. She just wanted to play one perfect song, one that came from the heart. The night of the gala arrived sooner than she expected. The grand ballroom looked almost identical to the one from before. Same glittering chandeliers, same expensive gowns and suits, same polished piano waiting under the lights. But this time she wasn't wearing a waitress uniform. She wore a simple, elegant dress the billionaire's assistant had arranged for her. Nothing too flashy, but enough to make her feel like she belonged. She stood backstage, breathing slowly, trying to calm the nerves that made her knees weak. The billionaire came to see her before the performance. For the first time, he looked a little nervous too. "You don't owe them anything," he told her softly. "Play for yourself. That's all that matters," she nodded, holding onto those words like a lifeline. When her name was announced, the room quieted. People turned their heads, some recognizing her instantly. There were whispers. "Isn't that the waitress from last time?" But she didn't look at anyone. She walked slowly to the piano, her steps light but steady. Sitting down, she placed her hands gently on the keys. The hall was silent. For a moment she hesitated, eyes closed, feeling her heartbeat echo in her chest. Then she began to play. The first few notes were soft, almost fragile. They floated through the air like distant memories. The melody built slowly, carrying warmth, sadness, and hope all at once. It wasn't a famous song. It was something she had written herself, a blend of everything she had felt over the past years. Loss, endurance, rediscovery. The crowd listened, completely still. There were no whispers, no laughter, just her music filling the space, wrapping around every corner of the room. The billionaire watched from his table, his eyes fixed on her, realizing how much emotion she poured into every note. It wasn't about perfection. It was about truth. As she reached the final part of the piece, her hands moved faster, stronger, as if she was releasing every hidden memory. The sound rose and fell like waves, ending finally on a soft, trembling note that faded into silence. For a few seconds, nobody moved. Then the applause began, quiet at first, then louder, rising into a standing ovation. People clapped, some even wiping tears. The billionaire stood too, clapping slowly, his face filled with pride. She bowed her head, her eyes shining but calm. She didn't cry, didn't smile too wide. She just breathed deeply, freely. The sound of the audience no longer scared her. It felt like closure. After the performance, people came up to her to congratulate and ask questions. Some wanted to know where she had studied. Others said her piece had moved them deeply. She answered politely, but all she could think about was how unreal it felt. Just months ago, she had been serving drinks in the same kind of room. Now she was standing as the center of it, not because of luck, but because she had dared to play again. Later, the billionaire found her standing alone near the piano, tracing her fingers across its smooth surface. "You did it," he said quietly. She turned to him and smiled. "We did it," he shook his head. "No, you did. I just opened a door. You walked through it." There was a pause. Then he said, "You know, when I first made you play that night, I thought it would be amusing. I didn't realize you'd end up teaching me something about humility." She laughed softly. I guess we both learned something. He nodded, smiling faintly. What will you do next? She looked at the piano, then at the crowd still buzzing with excitement in the distance. Keep playing, she said simply. Maybe teach someday. Maybe write my own songs. I don't know yet, but I think I finally know who I am again. The billionaire reached into his pocket and handed her a small folded envelope. For your next step, he said. Inside was a letter of recommendation for a scholarship at one of the city's top music schools. She looked up at him, speechless. You've already done so much, he smiled. Then let this be the last thing. After this, you won't need my help anymore. The night ended with music still echoing faintly in her mind. When she stepped outside, the air was cool, the city quiet. She stood for a moment under the streetlights, looking up at the stars. Everything around her felt both familiar and new, as if she was seeing life through a cleaner lens. She didn't know where this path would lead. But one thing was clear. The girl who once hid behind a tray and lowered her eyes no longer existed. In her place stood someone stronger, braver, and full of music again. And somewhere behind her, watching from the ballroom window, the billionaire smiled. Not the proud smile of a man who had created success, but the humble smile of someone who had witnessed redemption. That night, she walked home not as a waitress or a performer, but as someone who had finally found her voice again. A voice made of music, heart, and truth. The days that followed her performance felt like a quiet storm. Everything looked the same around her, yet nothing truly was. The people who once overlooked her now greeted her with warmth and admiration. The billionaire's phone call changed everything. He had already submitted her scholarship recommendation, and within weeks, she was accepted into the city's prestigious music academy. When she received the letter, she sat at her small kitchen table for nearly an hour, staring at it. Her hands shook as she read the words again and again, hardly believing they were real. She was going to study music again, not as a dream but as a reality. That evening, she went back to the same piano studio she had practiced in for months. She played softly, her melody gentle and calm. This time, the music wasn't filled with pain or struggle. It was gratitude, a quiet conversation between her heart and the instrument that had never abandoned her. She thought about how much had changed since the night the billionaire first embarrassed her. What had started as a moment of humiliation had turned into a journey of rediscovery, and though she could never forget the sting of that night, she had come to understand that sometimes life pushes you through darkness so you can find your own light. The billionaire continued to support her from a distance. He didn't attend her classes or interfere with her lessons. He simply checked in once in a while, sending short messages like, "Keep playing or don't lose your spark." Those few words were enough to keep her motivated. One afternoon, after class, she received an unexpected message from him. He wanted to meet at the old studio, the one where she had practiced before her first big performance. When she arrived, he was already there, sitting quietly near the piano. There was something different about him that day. The usual confidence in his posture was still there, but his expression seemed heavier, almost thoughtful. "I wanted to thank you," he said simply when she walked in. She frowned a little. "Thank me? For what?" "For reminding me of something I'd forgotten," he said. "When you played that night, I realized I hadn't felt real emotion in years. I built so much, achieved so much, but somewhere along the way I stopped feeling anything." She didn't know what to say. For a moment, the silence between them felt like music itself, calm and honest. He looked down at his hands. "You know, I used to play too," he said quietly. "A long time ago." That caught her by surprise. "You played piano?" He nodded. "Before all this, before the companies, the money, the reputation, my mother was a pianist. She taught me. But when she passed, I stopped. I thought success would fill that hole, but it never did." She watched him carefully. For the first time, he looked human to her. Not the powerful man everyone admired, but someone who had once been broken, just like her. "You still can play," she said softly. "It's never too late," he smiled faintly. "Maybe, but I think some people are meant to listen instead." He stood up and walked toward the piano. "I've been thinking," he said. "There's another charity concert coming up in 2 months. This time I want to organize it differently. I want you to be the one who leads it. Not as a performer only, but as a symbol of what second chances look like." Her heart skipped a beat. "You want me to lead?" "Yes," he said. "You'll choose the theme, the music, and even the performers. We'll donate the proceeds to help underprivileged students who want to study the arts. You'll be the face of it." She was speechless. The thought of standing in front of that kind of responsibility scared her, but it also thrilled her. "I don't know if I can," she admitted honestly. "You can," he said firmly. "You've already done harder things." Over the next few weeks, they began to work together on the project. It wasn't easy. There were meetings, decisions, and endless planning. The billionaire handled the financial side, while she focused on the music and the performers. They spent long hours in the studio, going through song choices, discussing themes, and selecting young musicians to join. At first, she was nervous around him. The memory of their first encounter still lingered somewhere in the back of her mind. But as time went on, that memory softened. She began to see him differently, not as the arrogant man who once humiliated her, but as someone trying to make amends in his own quiet way. He, in turn, treated her with genuine respect. He listened to her ideas, valued her opinions, and often encouraged her when she doubted herself. "You have leadership in you," he told her once. "You just never had a chance to use it." One late evening, as they reviewed the final performance list, the billionaire paused and looked at her thoughtfully. "You've changed," he said. She smiled softly. "Maybe I just remembered who I used to be." He nodded, smiling faintly. "It suits you." The night of the charity event arrived. The hall was packed. Guests, reporters, and students filled every seat. The lights glowed warmly and the stage was set beautifully. This time, she didn't hide behind the piano. She walked confidently to the microphone and addressed the crowd herself. "Music saved me," she said, her voice calm but full of emotion. "There was a time when I thought my dreams were gone forever. But someone believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. Tonight, I want to give that same hope to others." Her words drew quiet applause before she began to play. The orchestra joined her, and together they created something extraordinary. The music rose and fell like waves, filled with energy, emotion, and unity. In the audience, the billionaire sat silently, his eyes glistening. He wasn't watching just another performance. He was watching redemption unfold. The same girl he once mocked had become the heart of something far greater. When the performance ended, the crowd erupted in applause. Reporters rushed to capture photos, but she didn't care about the attention. She looked toward the billionaire, and he gave her a small nod, a silent thank you that said everything words couldn't. Later, after the crowd left, they stood alone in the empty hall. The stage lights were dim and the piano sat quietly between them. "You did something incredible tonight," he said softly. She shook her head. "We did," he smiled. "Maybe, but you were the soul of it." She hesitated before asking, "Why did you help me?" "Really?" He looked down for a moment, then said, "Because I saw in you what I lost in myself, and helping you reminded me that there's still good I can do in this world." The simplicity of his answer moved her more than any grand speech could. She placed a hand on the piano and whispered, "You gave me back my dream." He replied gently, "And you gave me back my humanity." For a long moment, they stood there in silence, letting the quiet room fill with the weight of everything they'd been through, the humiliation, the forgiveness, the growth. Before leaving, she turned and said, "You should play again." He smiled, amused. "You're not going to stop saying that, are you?" She shook her head. "No, because I think it's time you remembered too." He looked at the piano, then at her, and after a pause, he sat down. His hands hovered over the keys, uncertain at first. Then he played a few simple notes, uneven, hesitant, but real. She listened, smiling as the sound filled the hall. When he stopped, she said quietly, "See, it's still there." He laughed softly. Maybe it never really left. That night, they locked the hall together, walking out into the cool evening air. The street was quiet, the city lights reflecting off the windows. For the first time, neither of them said much. They didn't need to. Both had found something they'd lost, not just through music, but through each other's courage. And as they went their separate ways, each carried the sound of that shared melody, the one that had started with humiliation and ended with healing. The world outside didn't know every detail, but those who had been there knew they'd witnessed something rare. The moment two people from completely different worlds helped each other remember what it meant to be human again. The months after the charity event felt like a dream, slowly unfolding into reality. Her days were filled with music, teaching, and small performances across the city. Her name started appearing in local newspapers, always mentioned with the same words, "The waitress who silenced the room." At first, she didn't like the attention. She wanted to be known for her music, not for the story behind it. But with time, she realized that her past wasn't something to hide. It was part of who she was and proof that even the most unexpected beginnings could lead to something beautiful. She began teaching part-time at a small community center for children who couldn't afford music lessons. Most of them had never touched a real piano before. Watching their eyes light up as they pressed the keys reminded her of herself years ago. Every time a child played their first melody, she felt the same quiet joy that had started her own journey. One afternoon, while teaching, she received a call from the billionaire. His tone was softer than usual. "I'm leaving the city for a while," he said. "Leaving?" she asked, surprised. "Yes," he replied. "I need time away. The company's been running me down. I want to travel, see things I've ignored for years." She didn't know how to respond at first. Over the months, they had built a strange friendship, one rooted in respect, honesty, and shared growth. The thought of not seeing him around felt strange. "That sounds like something you need," she finally said. "You should go," he chuckled quietly. "I was hoping you'd say that. You were the one who told me to play again, remember? I think it's time I listen." After the call ended, she sat by the piano, thinking about how much they had both changed. Once he was the man who had embarrassed her in front of hundreds of people. Now he was someone she admired, someone who had learned, just like she had, that success meant nothing without heart. A few weeks later, he came to see her before leaving. They met at the old music hall where everything began. The hall was empty, quiet except for the faint echo of footsteps on the marble floor. "I wanted to say goodbye properly," he said, smiling gently. She smiled back. "You don't have to. You helped me more than you think." "And you helped me," he said. "You reminded me that people matter more than pride or money. That's something I'll take with me." They talked for a while and about music, travel, life. Then he handed her a small envelope. Inside was a letter and a simple silver key. "What's this?" she asked. "It's yours," he said. "A small studio. A place for you to play, teach, or record whatever you want. It's not charity. It's an investment in something that changed my life." Her eyes filled with tears. "I can't accept this." "Yes, you can," he said quietly. "Just promise me one thing, never stop playing." She nodded, unable to speak. They stood in silence for a moment before he turned to leave. Before walking out, he looked back and said, "One song can change everything. You proved that." After he left, she sat at the piano in the hall. Her fingers rested gently on the keys, and she began to play the same melody she had played that unforgettable night, the song that had silenced the crowd. But this time it sounded different. It wasn't a song of pain or survival anymore. It was one of peace. As the months passed, her studio became a small but lively place. She called it the Second Note. It became a home for dreamers, for young musicians, old ones, and anyone who believed in second chances. People came from different backgrounds, but they all shared one thing: the need to express something through music. She often remembered what the billionaire had said, that one song could change everything. She saw it happen again and again in that studio. Kids who had never touched a piano began to play with confidence. Adults who had given up on their dreams started again. The room was filled with laughter, mistakes, and melodies, all woven into something real and alive. One evening, while locking up the studio, she received a letter in the mail. It had no return address, but she knew the handwriting instantly. Inside there was a short note. "I've been traveling through quiet towns and listening to music in small places. It feels good to be nobody again. I even played at a local cafe once. Badly, but with heart. I thought you'd be proud. Keep playing. Always." She smiled as she read it, holding the letter close. She didn't need to write back. The words were enough. Years passed and her name grew in the music world. She started performing internationally, not as a famous celebrity, but as someone whose story inspired others. Reporters often asked about the night she silenced the billionaire's gala. She always answered simply, "That night changed 2 lives, mine and his." Her success never made her forget where she came from. She still wore the same necklace she had the night of the gala, a small charm her mother had given her. Whenever she felt nervous before a concert, she would touch it, close her eyes, and remind herself why she started. One winter evening, She was invited to perform at a major concert hall, the same one she used to pass by years ago when she couldn't even afford a ticket. As she stepped on stage, the audience stood and applauded. She sat at the grand piano, took a deep breath, and began to play. Her music carried stories where the sound of struggle, forgiveness, and hope. Every note spoke of a journey from humiliation to triumph, from fear to freedom. Halfway through the performance, she looked up and froze for a second. In the third row, an older man was sitting quietly, smiling faintly. It was him, the billionaire. He looked different, his hair grayer, his expression softer, but his eyes were the same. He gave her a small nod, the same one he had given her years ago after that first song. For a moment, time stopped. She played the rest of the piece with tears in her eyes. When it ended, the crowd erupted into applause. She stood bowing deeply, but her gaze stayed fixed on him. After the show, she found him waiting backstage. "I thought you were still traveling," she said with a bright smile. "I was," he replied, "but I couldn't miss this." They talked for hours and about everything and nothing. He told her stories about small villages, street musicians, and the people he'd met on his travels. He said he had finally found peace, something money had never given him. When she asked if he still played, he laughed. A little, badly, but with joy. As they stood outside under the soft glow of the streetlights, he looked at her and said, "You know, that night at the gala, it wasn't just a song. It was a mirror. You showed everyone what truth sounds like. And I'll never forget it," she smiled gently. "Neither will I." They parted with a quiet hug. There were no promises, no grand goodbyes, just two people who had once crossed paths at the right moment in life. In the years that followed, her career reached new heights, but she stayed humble. She continued teaching, performing, and helping others find their voice through music. Sometimes, when she sat alone in her studio late at night, she would play that same old melody, the one that started everything. It had become her reminder that kindness could come from unexpected places, and that even the worst moments could turn into something meaningful, and somewhere in another city. The billionaire would sometimes play the same tune, not perfectly, but with heart. Neither of them knew it, but every time they played that song, the world felt just a little bit smaller, as if their music still connected them somehow, because in the end it wasn't about fame, wealth, or pride. It was about one simple truth, that music could heal, that humility could change hearts, and that sometimes all it took to change a life was the courage to play one song.